Hey everyone, I'm using a new app today called Video Pause, and what I'm trying to do is to see if this will allow me to show you how I actually make a recipe for my chili. I know a bunch of people have asked for it, and there are a couple secrets and tips in terms of how I prepare the different ingredients, so hang on, let's see if this works, and if it's so, it'll be posted and we'll have some success. Thanks. Here's our basic list of ingredients for the chili, and I always start with some good meat. We have some Italian sweet sausage, a couple pounds of that back there. That's about 2.5 pounds. I've got a chuck roast. I'm actually going to throw that on the grill in a minute. And today, instead of ground beef, I'm going to use ground turkey and try that out today. But you can substitute the ground beef for this. I always put a little wine in the chili, some hot sauce, definitely a bottle of beer. I like using the crushed and diced tomatoes rather than tomato sauces. And I combine red and black beans. I put a little honey in to take some of the tartness out of the tomatoes. And then we've got our peppers and our onions. I like 3 white, 1 red. Red gives a little zest. I use this salt here called J.Q. Dickinson, which is a gourmet salt. You can also use a sea salt. I like to top off the chili, you'll see, with a little bit. We won't use this whole bag, obviously, but a little bit of the Nestle's Toll House semi-sweet chocolate. That combined with the cinnamon and the red wine really brings out some nice flavor. We got some minced garlic over here. I'm pretty generous on the garlic in my chili. One of the other things I've got, this one's a little bit harder to find, but this is maple seasoning. So another sweetener for the chili since there's so much tartness in the tomatoes. And then I use the McCormick chili packages. You can actually mix in a lot of your own in terms of cumin and cayenne and chili powder and things like that. I actually supplement these with these spices over here. But this will give you a real good base without having to go crazy and trying to figure out the spice mix. So that's it to get us started. Next step is I start to cook the meat. Hold on for 1 second, let me get the pan heated up. And actually, before going to the pan, let me just say that I use a, what do they call it, Le Creuset pot to cook the chili in. Any good pot that doesn't allow the bottom to get too hot, brings the heat up the sides, won't allow it to burn, is a good chili pot because you want it to simmer. What I do is I season a little bit, I let it sit here with some olive oil and some red cayenne pepper, and when I start throwing the ingredients in, that'll mix in nicely to give the meat a little bit of a zing. I'm heating up the pan now to do the ground turkey, which would normally in my chili be ground beef, but today again we're going to go with the ground turkey. So the first thing I do is I apply lots of butter around the bottom of the pan so that when I throw the meat in, it'll sear, but it won't stick and make a mess of the pan. When you add the ground turkey, you'll definitely want to chop it up. Get it down into nice small pieces so that it browns evenly. Hey, okay, so next step. I used to actually braise the meat in the pan. I'd throw in garlic and then braise the meat in the pan inside. But I found putting it on the grill gives a little bit of a more of a smokier flavor. So I'm going to do that today. Hold on 1 second. Okay, so there we have our chuck roast. We got the grill smoking hot. I always throw some olive oil on there so the meat won't stick. And then throw the meat right on top. Now again, I'm going to let that sit, and all I want to do is sear it. So I'll throw it on there for a little while. I get busy with the olive oil. That gives it that flame broiled texture on the outside, and when I cut it up, it'll add a nice flavor to the chili. And so you wait about a minute, minute and a half on one side, minute and a half on the other side. That's it. The meat will fully cook while it's cooking in the chili, simmering in the chili. And that'll make it nice and tender as well. So as you can see, really just a minute or so, I got it braised on the one side, nice char grilled lines there. I keep adding a little olive oil to get the flame going up around it real nicely. So there you go. Again, just enough to put a searing on that meat, put some flavor in it, and now we'll bring it inside and let it set and cool off before we cut it up and throw it in the chili. Okay, real quick back to the turkey. We can see the turkey's browning up pretty good there. It's cooking well, and I don't like to cook it all the way through. It makes it tough. So what I'm going to do now is drain off the fat and place it in the pot to be added to later. So here you can see the fat that we pulled off of the turkey. Even though it's a lean meat, you'd have probably twice that with the beef. You're going to flip the meats without a spatula. Make sure you're nowhere near that pan. Alright, that's cooked. We're going to dump that in there, let that set, and now we're going to get busy on the sausage. Okay, to me, sausage is the key to the good chili, so I try to pick out a good brand. A lot of times I'll go to the butcher, but you know, just even the store brand, as long as you've tried it before, if you like it, you know that they put a good quality meat in there, you're probably going to be okay. But the key to it, for me, is the pan. I don't use the non-stick pan on this. I actually use either a cast iron or a regular skillet. You want the sausage to stick to the bottom of the pan as it's browning, because you're going to deglaze that later and put it in with the mix, and that's all the good stuff. That's adds a lot of flavor. So what I do though is I butter up the pan real good. I make sure it gets real nice, hot and toasty, screaming hot. I throw in a good amount of butter, and then we're going to add some garlic. And I do the sausage in batches. So the first batch is going to christen the pan, and every batch after I'll do the same thing in terms of the butter and the garlic, and then throwing in, I'll uncase the sausage and throw in the ground meat, chop it up, and let it brown real good. For those of you who hate uncasing sausage, the trick is I just split them. I take a nice sharp knife, split the casing, and then just pop the meat out into the pan. Okay, so I've uncased the sausage and placed it in the pan to start browning. Just as I did with the turkey, I want to chop it up into fine pieces as it cooks. I don't actually go for the small kind of ground. I like the chunks more. And as you can see, when it gets a nice brown on it, that's the same thing that's forming on the bottom of the pan now between the sausage and the garlic, and that really adds some depth to the chili later. So here you can see just about a perfect mix of the sausage. So you can see it's really picking up the browning from the pan and starting to cook up nicely. Again, I try not to overcook it because it will cook in the stew, so really this is just a browning process. And we got the other half of the sausage ready to throw in after this batch. So that's it. That's as much as I want that sausage cooked. So that's being added to the turkey over here. And as you can see, we've got a nice leave behind that's going to be deglazed later after I get done with the beef and the rest of the sausage. I thought it might be worth showing you how I chop up the sausage. I actually use a spatula that is stiff and almost knife-like at the end, but I don't want to scratch the pan, and then I just continually chop it as the meat is cooking to keep the meat from cooking in huge chunks. So while the sausage is browning, one of the things I do is, and it's going to be a little hard to hold the knife, but I like to come over and then start slicing with a sharp knife a piece of chuck. And I cut it into slices, and then we'll cube it. And then I'll just do one more round of browning this in the pan that I'm now cooking the sausage in, and I'll show you that in a minute. Okay, so we've got the meat sliced there. I've done about half of it into cubes, which I will now take and throw into the pan that I just seared and browned the sausage in. Okay, so you can see this is nice and sizzling hot. Instead of butter for this meat, I'm going to use some olive oil. And again, I'm just going to toss these around a bit, get them a little bit more seasoned. And we're picking up some of the flavor in this meat of the sausage and the garlic, as well as the olive oil. So that makes the beef taste a little better in the chili. So if the meat was virtually raw when we took it off the grill, you can see this is more now just rare. It's cooked, it's seasoned, it's picking up again some of the flavors we have in this pan. So I will add this to the total mix. In order to let that pan not overheat, I just leave it there as I'm slicing up the second half of the beef. Okay, what we're looking at here is the last bit of the beef that needs to be added to the chili. You can see that it's already starting to glaze. The brown sauce is the mixture of the olive oil and the garlic and the meat juices that are working on getting all the good stuff up off the pan. So what I'm going to do is drain all that out of there. And then to properly deglaze the rest of the good stuff from here, we take our red wine. And we just pour in a little bit, and you just start stirring until all the bits come off the bottom of the pan, which they will. This will make a almost like a roux, but once this is done and you've got the pan pretty much cleaned out, you're just going to basically empty this right into the meats that you've already put in the chili pot. So here you can see now that this has turned from that nice red wine. I always actually use a good red wine rather than a cooking wine, but it's turned from that nice red wine into a brown sauce with all these pieces. Now there's a couple burn marks here. I don't scrape down to get those off because they will taste burned. I just take off the stuff that easily kind of comes off just by a light scraping. Okay, now that we've got about probably well over 6 pounds of meat in this pot, what I do is I take a beer, a nice darker lager. You can use Guinness, you can use Sam Adams. I take that and I pour that over the mix. And then what I do is I just put this on a very low simmer while I'm preparing the vegetables to throw in with the tomatoes and everything else. And that starts to moisten up the meat and give a little bit of extra flavor. So now I'm on to the least favorite part of the recipe making, and that is I cut these peppers into strips and then cut the strips into thirds. Sometimes even quarters, depending on, like with the red peppers, they're pretty long, so I'll cut them into quarters. And then I take and I dice the onions, the 3 white and the 1 red. So I'll get started on that and I'll be back when it's all done. Okay, so we've finished all the meat and now I have the special surprise part. This is something that every great chef needs to keep in mind when they are cooking. And if you don't give the chef some motivation, the food just doesn't turn out as good. So anyway, this is my motivation for today. We'll keep it neat. And I'm sure now, as I finish processing all the vegetables for the chili, that this will definitely help us. So, as I was saying before, when it comes to the vegetable part, I like to dice up the peppers about this size. I do a mix of mostly green, but a few red peppers are a little sweeter. And then the onions, I do a 3-to-1 ratio of white to red. You can, depending on how spicy you like your onions, you can play with that. But for the onions, I definitely cheat and I use the Cuisinart because it is definitely not worth crying over. So I just quarter the onions, throw them in the Cuisinart, give it a couple pulses until they're all nicely diced. And then we're actually going to fry up the onions a little bit just to put a little bit of taste on them with some garlic and some olive oil. The peppers we're going to wait. Those don't get thrown in until probably an hour or two later. Okay, so we've got the pan all cleaned up a little bit, at least enough for the onions. The meat, I don't know if you can see the steam coming off of it. Again, on the lowest of heats, just to keep that simmering in that beer and really starting to soften up the meat. What I'm going to do now, I think I said olive oil, but I'm actually going to use butter for the onions. So I get the pan all ready to go. I'm going to open up the garlic. I'll be right back. So what I do is I just throw a little garlic in there. I think that's just a habit of being married to an Italian. So I get that going nicely. And then I take our onions and we get the onions going. I'll scrape the rest of those in there, but I only have two hands, so I've got to hold the camera here. And again, I just toss them around a little bit to kind of see how nice and diced they are. They're almost going to disappear by the time the chili cooks up. But while I'm cooking these, I like to give things individual flavors. So we're going to hit it up with a little bit of Louisiana hot sauce. And that'll carry through the onions even as they're cooked in the chili. Alright, we'll be right back. Okay, all the onions are ready to go. Okay, so we're now at the point where we're going to start to put in some of the other ingredients. You can see the flame that I've been using to just keep this meat kind of simmering. And the onions are in there, so it's all starting to cook down now and softening up the meat. Now we're going to add the tomatoes. I like 1 can of the whole tomatoes. Those will disintegrate as the mixture cooks. I like 2 cans of the diced tomatoes. Make it nice and chunky. 1 can. 2 cans, and I put in a can of the crushed to act almost like a tomato sauce, but I like chunkier, and just 1 can of the sauce. So that'll get us going. Now what I want to do is mix it up real good. Get it turned over. And it'll start to cook the tomatoes down into the mix. Okay, now, as I said earlier, the starting point for your spices is just a chili mix. You can use any brand, Old El Paso. I use McCormick. And I just pour those all in there. That'll get us started with our spice. I mix that up and I cook that down real good. Again, I've got the onions in there, I've got the meat, I've got the tomatoes, now we've got the spices. And the final thing that will go in will be the peppers. And right before that are the red beans and the black beans. If you like white beans, you can use those, whatever you like. So I know some people who use them, who actually use them hard and soften them up themselves. But you can see now it'll start to take on that nice brown color as I get it all stirred in. I will add a little more hot sauce just to give it a little bit of a spike. And then we'll start to play with it near the end with the honey, the cinnamon, and the chocolate. So we're almost there. Okay. We're at the point now you can see I've had this simmering, and I just want to emphasize the key to at this point, once you've got your spices in, once you've got your tomatoes and your meat, and even when you're just simmering the meat, medium low heat in a longer period of time to cook it. The simmering is what's good for the chili. If you turn it up and burn it, you're going to lose the whole batch. So right now I'm going to get the peppers, and I like to add in a pretty good amount of peppers. I don't know how many cups that is, but again, we got about 6 full-size peppers in there. And I'll stir that in, and then once I'm done stirring that in, we'll add the red beans. Okay, so the final step for now is to get the beans into the chili and let this simmer down. Once it's simmered and the peppers have softened, almost to the point where you're not going to be able to see them anymore, that's when I'll come back and we'll do the cinnamon and the chocolate and the honey based on what this brew tastes like. Every time it's a little different. You want to just season it to taste at that point. You don't want the chocolate or the cinnamon to overwhelm. So in with the red beans. I like to throw in also a can of black beans because variety is the spice of life. And once we get all the beans in, I'm literally going to let this cook for 2 hours before I come back and hit it with the chocolate and with the cinnamon. Okay, here's where the fun part starts. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into the kitchen, and the chili's been simmering not quite for 2 hours, but I didn't have the patience to wait to get this part started. Once you get to this point and you see that you've got the peppers softened up, then you can start to play with the taste. And so the first thing I do that's an automatic, even before tasting it, is to add the chocolate. I always put the chocolate in the chili, so we've got a cup, or actually a quarter cup here, of Nestle's morsels. This would dark semi-sweet. So I add those in, and those will melt in right away. The big question is how much cinnamon you want. And I always add the cinnamon now before I start doctoring the spices, because if you over cinnamon the chili, it'll kill all of the flavors that you've worked to kind of create this depth with the mix that you've got right now. So that's pretty good. Let's see. So the ground cinnamon, basically, that's it. Just going to put a little sprinkle on top. To me, it's lacking a little fire, so I'm going to put a little extra chili powder in there. And just to sweeten it up a bit, I really love this maple seasoning. Again, I know it's hard to find. There's a place out in Pennsylvania that my friends, the Schaefers and the Yates out by their farm. It's called Locks, and they make all of this stuff custom. But it's pretty amazing stuff. It really does make a nice flavor. I'm also going to put in a little bit of cayenne pepper because I think, again, it needs some fire. And then finally, just to top it off, I'm going to do a pinch or two of this great new salt that I found, J.Q. Dickinson. You can actually buy this online if you go to the website. So with that, we'll get it stirred up. I'm probably going to allow this to simmer another 2 to 3 hours before I serve it. I'll just take a taste and see how that new seasoning did. Oh, wow. That's awesome. I don't know if you can see me, but that's really good. Again, one little shot of hot sauce. Not spicy enough for my liking, and that's it. Done. Under 25 minutes. Actually, on the video time, it took about, I'd say preparation time is about an hour to an hour and a half with all of the work on the peppers and the onions and the meat and everything else. Thanks, everybody. Hope you enjoy.